Alright guys, just taking a look at a very advanced 35mm film camera that's manual focus but auto everything else. So it's got auto rewind, it's got auto film advance, and it's got auto exposure, 3 different auto modes, and it's got aperture priority exposure as well, and a full manual control mode. This camera also features a 3 different metering system. It's got a average metering right here. It's got a kind of a early matrix metering. It's got auto backlight compensation, and it's also got a spot metering mode. So total of 3 metering mode, and every setting is changed by pressing the up and down button over here. You got your shutter release right here, and the camera also features a continuous focusing mode, which is done by pressing this button right here. So once you have continuous focus enabled, it's able to do up to 3 frames per second continuous focus, which is super cool. It's got a dedicated flash shoe mount, which you can use the dedicated TTL enabled flash, which this one is Ricoh 260p speed light. Once you have it on there, in the viewfinder, it's going to give you flash ready indicator light, and the camera is going to do TTL through the lens metering with the flash exposure to give you a better exposed picture with the flash. Let's see. And if you flip this over here, you go into the command control center. This is where kind of some of the interesting functions happens. So you got a mirror, you got a multiple exposure function. To do that, you have to press the ISO and exposure compensation button right here. You press both and you hit exposure. The film is not going to advance. It's going to do multiple exposures as long as you press that button. Once you lose it and you press that button again for the last exposure, the film advances. You got a interval meter, and again, this is really cool for a 35mm film camera. The time setting can be changed from all the way from 1 second to 3600 seconds, which is 1 hour. So you got a pretty good range for time lapse if you want. And based on different settings, you can use full auto mode. So once it meters, it takes exposure, and you can go into manual mode by overriding the auto mode. And then you go into manual mode, you long press the shutter change button right here, up and down, and you can use a manual setting for the interval meter as well. To reset everything, if you kind of messed up your settings, just simply press reset button. It goes into program mode automatically if your lens is set into program mode. You get a 4-stop exposure compensation right here, plus -4 in 1/3 increments, which is a very wide latitude of exposure compensation. You got actually auto DX ISO coding readout. So you don't really need to use the ISO setting right there, but it does have a ISO manual override, or if you use one of those films that does not have an ISO coding on there. To take a look at the film chamber, you press this little red button and then push down on the button. It opens up the film chamber. This chamber, it looks like any of those modern advanced 35mm film cameras. And this camera itself is very advanced to start with. Okay, and you also got a film readout window right here, which is very nice and convenient. Auto loading. So all you have to do, put the film here, get your film a little bit longer, all the way to the red, to the indicated green area, as indicated on here, like the instruction said. So you put the film into the green area, you close the camera, it only rewinds to the first frame for you. And if you do have films in there, it's going to display a frame count and film properly loaded sign. If the film is not properly loaded, it would have some other signs displayed right here. The camera shutter speed is fairly light. It's noticeable, but it's not super loud. So again, acceptable shutter speed sound level. I don't have a film to test for you, but you can kind of get a sense of the advancing sound by just opening up the film door and hearing that sound. That's how it's going to sound when it advances the film. It's powered by 4 AA batteries in here. You have the option of a AAA battery holder, but I've never seen that anywhere. It's probably like a very rare item nowadays. The viewfinder, super nice and bright, and there is a full LED information readout right inside. The LED, once you go into a dark area, sometimes for other cameras, the old cameras, you cannot see the LED in the dark area. This one have a auto illuminator. So if the shutter speed goes below 30ths of a second, the auto illuminator turns on, so you're able to see the LED in very low light situations. Very, very nice, okay? The lens is dismounted by pressing the lens mount button, and it exposes the internals, which looks pretty standard. And the lens here, it's a kit lens that's general use, 35mm to 70mm f3.4 to f4.5. It's okay, but my advice is get a prime lens if you can. This camera is able to use any other Pentax SMC K-mount lens, so you have a lot of choices for very, very sharp 35mm manual focus lens from Pentax. And you can also get prime lens from Ricoh as well. That also features the P mode to enable full program mode in this camera. If you're using Pentax lens, you don't have the P mode, but you do have full aperture priority control, which is, pretty much all I use nowadays. So again, very useful and very feature-rich camera. The camera features something very interesting. So it features a left-hand shutter release. That's unheard of for me before I stumbled upon this camera. Okay, left-hand shutter release. To do that, you're gonna utilize this 10-second self-timer. By the way, the timer setting is customizable using custom settings. But the self-timer, I'm gonna customize it to use it as a left-hand shutter release by pressing the interval meter button and change the interval to 0 seconds. So once the display is 0, I can use this button as a left-hand shutter release. So very, very cool. I mean, for people who likes to use their left hand, that's just one setting that's really, really interesting that I find. And another thing interesting is the camera strap is on one side. So you lock your camera like this. And because I guess the camera is kind of heavy on here because there's batteries here, so it's easier to hand the camera this way. So that's also something interesting. You got a manual film rewind. If you're using a film that doesn't rewind itself at the end of the roll, you have the manual rewind. Or you want to rewind mid-roll, you have the option to do that. There are a auto exposure lock button over here. Very, very, very useful for manual focus film cameras. With the auto exposure lock, you're able to take a reading with one of those advanced metering modes, and you press the auto exposure lock. There's an indicator in the viewfinder that's gonna say AEL, and it's gonna flash. So with that set, you can recompose your pictures with the auto lock from a setting that you properly exposed, maybe on the model's face or maybe on the subject, to properly compose the picture instead of putting your subject right at the center of the frame. You also got a dedicated depth of field preview button. If you press that, it's gonna preview the depth of field. If you're in the auto mode, of course, it's gonna preview the auto mode depth of field that the camera selected for you. If you're in the aperture priority mode, of course, you can preview the aperture that you set. Another thing I want to mention is in the program mode, it's got 3 settings. Okay, so it's got a PA, it's got a P, and it's got a PD. So basically what they does is they change the priority of choosing the aperture ever so slightly. In PA mode, it's gonna have the tendency of using a larger aperture for the exposure, and the camera is gonna set a fairly large aperture for you and a shutter speed corresponding to that aperture. So PA mode is great for portraits. If you go to P mode, that's like kind of middle of the road. It's good for general photography. And if you're using PA mode, the camera is gonna use a very small shutter speed. That's gonna make sure that, for example, if you're taking a picture of landscape, you're gonna get a very sharp picture out of the landscape in program D mode. So again, 3 useful program modes, not like other cameras which just slaps a P mode for you. You don't really know what the camera was doing for you. This camera gives you a full option of control even in program modes. And again, very, very feature-rich, advanced 35mm manual focus film camera. This camera is introduced in 1987. As you guys know, I think in 85 or 86, Minolta introduced the first ever, world's first autofocus camera, the Minolta 7000. And after that, all the manufacturers kind of stopped making 35mm manual focus cameras because everybody jumped onto autofocus. The camera body became some more plastic, as evident in the late 80s. It's full plastic, but it's still very solid and a very good feeling when you're holding it in the hand. And it's definitely looking better than a lot of other plastic cameras back in the days. It hasn't aged, or I would say it's actually aged quite well for a camera in the 80s. If you guys have any questions about this particular camera, feel free to ask me in the comment section down below. I'd be happy to answer for you guys. And if you guys know anything else that I did not know about this camera, also let me know in the comment section. And thank you so much.